Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, the founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this video, I'm going to give you my predictions for the August 2024 SAT. Now we're going to go through a list of topics of things you should expect. I'm going to give you two very hard questions that I just wrote that can help you get a little bit of a boost on those really difficult ones. But mostly, I do want to reiterate something that I say at the beginning of a lot of these prediction videos. I know you guys love them. I know you want these videos, but if you have been studying, then you do not need me to predict what's going to be on the test. You know what's on the test because you've seen it on practice tests. You've seen it in my lesson videos. You know what to expect. The SAT is not that weird. They're doing the same things over and over and over again. We'll talk about how weird the SAT can be, but let's just first talk about a little bit of an overview of all the different things we're going to expect on the two sections of the test. Now we know this, right? We know there's going to be vocab, and I predict that at least one vocab question will involve the word this or the colon punctuation mark to basically just give us the definition for the word in the blank. They love doing that. I also predict that there will be a couple questions with some hard words, and I predict that some of you will think in the moment, I wish I had studied my vocabulary words one last time before the test, but others of you will be totally fine. You'll be like, oh, thank God I studied, and I predict you'll feel really good seeing some of the words you studied on this test. I predict that there will be some passages that you will read and you will have no idea what the heck is going on. But I predict at least one of them will involve some sort of dumb summary connotation where you can think about positives and negatives to get rid of choices and make that hard passage much easier to understand. I also predict that there will be some sort of graph question that just takes up a lot of time. And we got to be careful with that. That's why we have to make sure we're pacing ourselves correctly. And we will do one question that I wrote that is a chart question, a graph question, so that way you can get a little bit of a boost on those. They just love sucking up time with those graphs. So we'll make sure we have the best strategies possible for that later on in this lesson. I also predict that there will be grammar questions involving semicolons and modifiers and conjunctions and apostrophes. I predict that at some point they will get you to use a colon in a way that you would never have thought, but that the rules require you to use. So just remember what the rules are for the colon, and I've got a video if you don't, so make sure you go to that. I predict that people who skip first to the grammar will do better than people who don't, because the people who skip will get right to the easy questions first, knock them out with plenty of time, and then they won't run out of time with easy points left on the table. Hopefully, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I've got a new lesson on reading pacing strategies that I highly recommend. I predict that the transitions questions will involve words like accordingly and consequently and hence, and that you'll do much better on those questions if you just remember that all those words mean so. I also predict that at least one of those transition questions will involve the strategy where if two of the choices mean the exact same thing, that they can be dumb summary to the same simple word like but or and or so, then we can cross out both of those choices and make a much better guess at a hard question because we'll have a good way to eliminate wrong answers. I predict that most of the outline questions will be very easy, but at least one will make you go back to the question to look for a second goal or to the bullet points to correct some information, but that these are easy points that you'll get if you do the right pacing strategy. In math, I predict that the algebra questions will involve at least one question with the words in terms of, where you can easily arithmetize to make that algebra go away. I also predict that at least one question will have a crazy equation that we can just plug right into Desmos and have it solve it for us with those vertical lines so that we don't have to do any algebra whatsoever. I predict there will be lots of XY plane questions. These are the ones that involve lines and quadratics and exponentials. We have to think about how those equations match those graphs and what they tell us about those things. So if we've studied those formulas, we should be really good. I predict they will ask us in many questions about the number of solutions, either for lines or quadratics or maybe a system of both. I also predict we will get at least one of those weird quadratic equation questions where we've got to think about a lot of different properties of quadratics and bring them together in just the right way. And I did write a question that we'll use later in this video so we can go over some of those rules. I predict that some of the questions will involve what I call numeracy or basic arithmetic, but in ways that involve traps. Specifically, I believe that the SAT will, like it always does, use percentages to try to trap you. But I predict that people who stick to the open formulas will do totally fine and have no problem with those questions. I predict that the statistics questions will be very, very minor on the SAT, but they might just slip in one weird one where we have to think about a hypothetical set and change it in some way. And for those of you who are channel members, just go on to my channel homepage and you will see I just uploaded a list of 10 statistics twists questions just to make sure you're totally prepared in case they try some weird stuff with statistics on this exam. And I also predict they'll try something weird with geometry, some weird picture, or maybe they'll make you draw the picture. But I predict that no matter how weird it is, some combination of drawing radiuses and making triangles will help you get through it. So just have a little faith in those strategies. Finally, I predict that if half of the things that I just said make no sense to you, then you have not done enough studying and you were not very well prepared for this exam. But if what I said did make sense, then most of this test will be very, very routine. So you've got nothing to worry about. Plus, you got a week left to study and review for those things that maybe I went through. You're like, I've never heard that before. What's the open formula? Well, I got a video. Go look at my channel homepage. You'll find it, and it is definitely worth watching. But let's talk big picture. How predictable is an SAT? What does it even mean to predict what's going to be on the exam? Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and even if you've only taken one practice test, I think a lot of this test will be pretty predictable to you as well. I would say that about 50% of every SAT is very routine, very obvious. The topic is obvious. The process for solving is exactly what you would do in school. And so we're going to feel very good about half the test. Of course, we don't remember that half. That's the half that we just kind of breeze through. It's the stuff that doesn't fall in that 50% that sticks with us. But if we've done our studying, we've memorized the grammar rules, memorized the formulas, know a decent amount of vocabulary words, half of this test will be just kind of very automatic and robotic for you. And that's good. That's what we want. Now, about 40% of the test will be a little harder. Questions where you need to untwist whatever's going on in the question. And I use this word twist a lot in my videos. Basically, if a question is twisted, what they're doing is they're taking some common topic, some common idea, something that we see a lot, and they're asking it in an uncommon way, a way that makes it hard to even notice what the topic is. But if we've been practicing, we should be good at these kinds of questions where we need to untwist it and bring it back to the basics of what we know. A great example of this is something where maybe a basic question, one of those routine ones, would just ask you for the surface area of a prism, of a box. And hopefully you know what surface area is, and it's just a bunch of length times width, and you get a bunch of sides, and you add them together, and that's your surface area. Now, a twisted question might take that, and they might give you the surface area to start with. And then they might provide you a rule or two. Maybe the width is half of the length. And so you have to kind of build an equation or guess and check in some way to find out the side length for this box, working backwards from stuff that normally you would be able to solve for. So that, to me, that sounds hard, but that's still a very predictable question in a way, because it's the same rule we always knew, but now it's just being asked kind of backwards. So there's about 40% of the test, I would say, is this kind of stuff where, again, if you've studied, you're going to be able to recognize what to do, and then just you have some processes that you can use, some formulas you can write down in your scratch paper to work through that question. Maybe in reading, you know how the trap answers work and you can kind of spot those, but that is the kind of stuff that makes a good score into a great score, is being really good at untwisting questions. But that still leaves 10% where we've never seen it before. And I don't mean that the topic is completely new. They don't really do that. We're not going to get some topics that they've never put on an SAT before. There are some things that are rarely on SATs, so maybe just if you haven't done a ton of practice, you wouldn't have seen it. But for the most part, this 10% is stuff that no matter how long you've been taking SATs, it's going to be new to you. So whether this is your first SAT, your third SAT, or like me, your 100th SAT, about 10% of it is always going to be stuff where you're like, I've never seen a question like this before. We still have the same ability, though, to untwist these questions. We're just going to need to work a lot harder for it. So this is where we basically need time and tools. We need time to work through these questions, to try different things, and we need tools, different things to try, different things like dumb summaries and thinking about trap answer choices, predicting the rule in the grammar questions. We need to be able to plug points into equations and arithmetize and use Desmos in clever ways. So for these 10%, you got to just be able to be so good on the other 90 that you can really work through these hard questions. But no matter how long you study, there will always be questions that surprise you. And I think that's an important thing to remember. And that way you don't get flustered when this new kind of stuff appears somewhere in these sections. So let's look at two of these 10% questions. We're going to look at a reading graph question and a math quadratics question. I will put them up on the screen. We'll do it for 10 seconds. That way you can pause if you want to solve it yourself. Then I'll go through it and we'll talk about some of the tools that we can use to kind of get back to some sort of semblance of basics with these really hard, unpredictable questions. All right, this is crazy, right? Well, my first piece of advice is remember, you get to choose which questions you cover. So this would be the kind of thing I would leave for last. It just looks crazy. Any of these chart questions are going to take a lot of time. So when you are doing the last few passage questions with whatever time you've got left in the hard module, pick the ones you are most likely to get right in the least amount of time. This is not one of them. Save this for last. But let's say we've got the time for that. Then we want to make sure we still answer this in an efficient way. So I'm going to try to give you the simplest kind of way to get to the right answer using the limited information that we understand here. So first things first, go to the question. Make sure you understand what they want. A lot of times these questions are very generic, but this one says something interesting. Which choice best describes data from the graph that weaken the psychologist's conclusion? So that's weird, but it does happen occasionally. Now, also worth pointing out is that they're telling us to focus on the conclusion. This is almost always the last sentence of these passages. So right here, concluded comes up at the end. I'm still going to read the whole thing, but for the most part, the first few sentences of these graph chart question passages are just kind of explaining what the chart says, and in a way that doesn't really give us new information. So let's read it, but you'll see what I mean. This is mostly filler. To investigate the potential benefits of listening to music for memory formation and retention, psychologist Horace Junko, Melinda Boach, and Cass Diaz-Wallace administered a series of tests to groups of students. Each test was preceded by a 15-minute study period wherein students were asked to memorize an assortment of facts about fictional cities that the students would be asked to recall on the test. After a baseline study period and tests were administered in complete silence, the psychologist gave the students a second study period and test with either high or low tempo music playing during the study period only, during the testing period only, or during both the study period and the testing period. So again, let's stop there for a sec. This is mostly filler. What did it tell us? It told us that there's high and low tempo music. We can see that from the chart. We have studying period, and testing periods, testing period only. That's in the legend there. That is clearly just stated in words in the passage. So most of what they said here is not useful. Occasionally something kind of slips in here that we need to pay attention to. So we'll come back to that, but don't panic about understanding these first few sentences. That is not the focus of the question. You should read them, but just don't reread them. Keep going. Now let's focus on the part that matters, the conclusion. After analyzing the results, the psychologist concluded that playing music while studying improved memory retention regardless of whether music was played during testing. So let's dumb summary this, okay? So dumb summary, hopefully you know what that is and you've watched all my videos where I talk about it. So I've been using a lot of mathematical kind of dumb summaries lately. I find those are very helpful. So let's try that here. Playing music while studying. So studying improved memory retention. So equals an increase in memory or an increase in retention. So there you go, right? That's nice and simple. I can think about that in a very simple way. I don't need to keep going back to the passage to remember what the conclusion is. I've got it on my scratch paper so I can think about it more easily. But there's a second part of this, regardless of whether music was played during testing. So I would write that too. Basically, testing doesn't matter, something like that. Testing doesn't matter, right? They're saying, when they say a word like regardless, they're being dismissive. They're saying that that doesn't matter. Now, the reason it's so helpful to have a dumb summary like that is when I move on to the question where they ask me to weaken it, understanding how to weaken a conclusion is much easier when you're thinking in mathematical terms, right? How would I do it? I just flip these summaries, right? So what I'm really looking for in the choices is something more like studying does not lead to an increase in memory retention, right? So just turn that equals into a not equals. And then testing doesn't matter. How would we weaken that? If we found some evidence that testing does matter, right? So it's easy to flip things when you've got easy things to flip, right? It's kind of like set yourself up for success. And not every question has this weaken idea, but I do see this sometimes in the normal passages where they have to support or weaken a conclusion. The logic questions often involve a theory that we get some new information on, and then we have to flip it in some way. Even vocab questions sometimes involve a lot of double negatives where it's helpful to think in terms of flipping the conclusion or the gist of the passage. So what this also tells me is maybe where to focus. The dumb summary here is telling me that studying is going to do something, and that that's going to focus me a little bit on these two sets of boxes, right? So we have studying where they're only playing music during the studying period, and here where they're playing it during both the study period and the testing period. So this conclusion is telling me that we're playing music during the studying period. That increases memory retention. Then whether or not we played it during the testing period, that doesn't matter as much. And so my weakened conclusion is still going to go after those two boxes. Now that can be helpful for eliminating things very quickly. Let's take a look at A. The students who were played high or low tempo music during only the testing period had learning retention scores that were below the baseline. So only the testing period. That's this box right here. So choice A is outside of the realm that I'm kind of interested in. This is a very common way to get rid of choices, and why dumb summaries are so useful. We're supposed to focus on these other boxes. In a very quick way, I would just be like, this is the wrong box. This is the wrong color. Maybe there's some way to weaken the conclusion that forces us to think about the other thing, but I just don't feel it here. And, like I said, I'm trying to do this in a way that's very quick and gets me maybe not 100% confidence in an answer, but maybe like 80 or 90%. And that would be the kind of thing, the kind of move that I would make to eliminate a choice pretty quickly. So let's get rid of choice A. Wrong stuff. Let's look at B. The students did not see an improvement in their retention when the low tempo music was played during both the studying and testing period. So in a dumb summary way, this seems to be saying that we've got this, like, that studying led to some sort of decrease in memory retention. So it's not quite what I wrote here, but it's kind of saying the same thing. If it didn't increase, then maybe a decrease might just be just as good. So in terms of dumb summaries, that looks good, but let's check it out, right? So this is low tempo music played during both the studying and testing periods. So that's going to mean we're looking at this box right here, low tempo, and then both studying and testing. So they're saying that did not see an improvement in retention in that. So is that true? Well, it's lower than the black box. It's lower than the studying period box. So maybe that means something. But this is where we have to understand a little bit of the passage. The actual way to interpret this graph is that the axis line is kind of more like the 100, not the 0. And the way we know this is that they say here that they're doing a baseline study in complete silence. And so they're getting a score for these students on this particular test where they're studying and testing in total silence. Then we're giving them a second test, and we're comparing the score from the second test where music is played at some point in the process to a silent test earlier. So this graph is showing the change in the retention based on that original silent test. So what's happening here is everything above the baseline is an improvement, right? So that means that this choice B that we're looking at is showing an improvement. They didn't improve as much as people who only played the low tempo music during the study period, but they still improved, and that is not what this says. It says that they did not see an improvement. This shows them scoring or having a retention score approximately 120% of what they started with, which is the same as saying this is a 20% increase in their score. So anything below this line would be a kind of doing worse, not improving. And so clearly that box is not below that line. So what's happening here is we just have an answer choice that's false, where the chart does not match the statement. And that happens. Even on hard questions, we have ones where it's just inaccurate. So the dumb summary seems to check out, but then the accuracy of the data does not. So hopefully you can kind of notice those things and just go to the right boxes quickly and understand the chart quickly. And understanding this is really important. This baseline thing is tough. I put this in here on purpose, but we can use it to help us with C. Playing high tempo music, high tempo, during only the study period. So that is high tempo, only the study period. That's telling us to look at this box right here. Resulted in a 10% reduction in students' learning retention. So this seems to be saying that studying led to a decrease in the memory, right? So this also is kind of saying the same thing. And this time it's true. Because look, now we're below that baseline, right? So now we are doing worse. The students who were listening to music only during that studying period did worse than when they were silent and doing the studying and the testing silently. So it's I don't know why that's the case. I don't care, but that's what this chart is showing. So we do need to understand the baseline in order to get that. So that's probably the answer. It seems true. It seems to match with our dumb summary. Let's look at D just to be sure. For students who played music during the study period, playing high-tempo music during testing made them more accurate, whereas playing low-tempo music during testing made them less accurate. Well, this is where dumb summaries really help me kind of get rid of this choice. What seems to matter here? High versus low, right? The whereas is telling me there's a contrast. So this is saying the tempo matters. Now, that's not quite the same thing as saying playing music during testing matters, right? This is telling us something affects the outcome, but it seems to me that it's not the thing we were supposed to care about. So at this point, in a question where I got to just move as fast as I can because I'm running out of time, I get rid of that and I pick C. A deeper reason that D is wrong is that the accuracy is not really measured here. There's a difference between this chart telling us the accuracy of the students versus their actual score in the exam. It's a baseline thing, right? We're comparing the first silent test to a music test. We don't know what their accuracy was on either of those tests. It's all relative to that silent test. So accuracy is not measured here. It's not on the y-axis. It is not reflected in any part of this chart. So this is something else that they do kind of in a sneaky way on these chart questions, is sometimes they will have a choice that maybe sounds pretty good, but it's trying to justify the answer in a way where we just don't have data. We don't know how to support that with actual data because the study didn't measure it or the chart doesn't reflect it. So we just got to watch out. And sometimes we can get through that kind of stuff by noticing words that don't really appear in the story or in the chart, but it is tricky to do. I think the best way to get rid of that choice is to recognize they're telling us that the tempo is going to affect things when that was not part of the original conclusion. So I just don't care. Hopefully that gives you something to think about. These are hard questions. I mean, my big takeaway from all of this is, yeah, some questions are just hard, guys. It's the way it goes. They don't want everyone to get an 800, and you don't need to get an 800. You just need to get close. And so if you can make smart choices about which questions you cover in the time limit, you can even just avoid this thing entirely, not let it bother you, throw it aside, guess a random letter. You got a 25% chance of being right anyway, and use your time on the stuff you know you can get right. But hopefully a couple of these little strategies I showed you, especially the dumb summary stuff, will help you if you do have time to work on these. Now let's look at a math question that is also hard, but where I think strategies and tools can really help us get that stuff right much more confidently if we've got the time to tinker with it. Now, for some of you who've been studying, a question like this might not fall into that 10% of weird stuff that you've never seen before that's completely unpredictable. I feel like we've seen questions like this on practice tests. We've got a quadratic, we've got some points, and my strategy, as always on the SAT, is if I can, I want to plug points into equations. That should be our default move for most math questions. If we have points and we have equations, do it. And guess what? We have points. We got two of them. We got an equation, right? So my brain does not really think more deeply than just let's go with that and plug them in and see what we get. So let's start with the 3 and the 12, and we can plug that in for x is 3 and y is 12. So we're going to get 12 is equal to 3 plus a squared plus b. Now, I don't know what to do with that. I can FOIL this thing out, that's for sure. So maybe we do that. So 12 is equal to, we can write it out if you need to, but this is going to be 9 plus 6a plus a squared plus b. So I don't know if that made it better or worse, but we've got a lot of letters here. And this is the problem. If we can't solve equations where we have 2 letters. Now, you might be thinking, can I make them up? Can I make up an A and a B? But I don't know. It feels like we've got a lot of other numbers that are kind of forced upon us. I don't know that we can make those up. So I wouldn't move to that yet. That would be an arithmetized move. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. But right now, that's okay. I don't get bothered when I don't have a clear sense of my plan. I would just continue with my strategy. Let's plug points into equations. We've got another point. Let's plug it in. So now we do -4, 5. So 5 is equal to -4 plus a squared plus b, right? So same kind of thing. We could FOIL this out. So 5 is equal to 16. -4 plus -4 is -8a plus a squared plus b. Again, I don't know if that's helpful, but at least now I can see I've got 2 equations and I've got 2 variables. Now we have them as a and b, But if they were x and y, that's just a system of equations. We can solve a system of equations when we have two variables because it's almost like we're finding that point of intersection. So we could use Desmos for that. I'm not going to because I want to save my Desmos for later. I've got a really cool way to do this that I want to make sure everyone knows. But we're going to do this old-fashioned way first because I do want you to understand that so much of that math stuff that looks completely new, like you've never seen it like it before, is really going to come down to this kind of plug points into equations and see what happens. You've got to be able to use that tool very quickly and very confidently. Now is where we need a little bit of kind of cleverness. What I would recognize is I can merge these equations by maybe solving for b and doing a little substitution. There are other ways to do it, but let's do that. So I'm gonna subtract 16 from both sides. So that's gonna get me 5 minus 16 is negative 11. You know what? I'm not even gonna risk it. Let's just use the calculator. 5 minus 16 is negative 11. And that's equal to negative 8a plus a squared plus b. But let's bring everything else over as well. Minus a squared, so plus 8a minus a squared. And we get, is there a good way to write this? How about negative 11 plus 8a minus a squared is equal to b. Now I can substitute that for the b in this other equation. And the reason to do that is then I don't have two variables or two letters anymore. I only have the one. So that's good for us. So let's change colors so we can make this really clear. We're going to have 12 is equal to 9 plus 6a plus a squared plus, well, actually now we can do minus 11a, or just 11, minus 11 plus 8a minus a squared. So it looks crazy, but it's not so bad. Just a lot of simplifying now, right? So we can get rid of the a squareds. They're going to cancel out. We can do 9 minus 11. That is negative 2. And we can do 6a plus 8a, that's plus 14a. And now it's a much simpler equation to start to solve. We add 2 to both sides. We get 14 is equal to 14a. Divide by 14, divide by 14. We get a is 1. Awesome, because now we can go anywhere and try to get our b just by substituting back in. So I'm going to go up to here. Let's go all the way around and come back in here, and that way we can do it without having to deal with a million pieces. Actually, we can do it right here instead. Let's do it right there. So 12 is equal to 9 plus 6 times 1, right? So plus 6 plus 1 squared is plus 1 plus b. So 12 is equal to 9 plus 6 is, well, 10 plus 6 is 16 plus b. Subtract 16, subtract 16. Negative 4 is equal to b. What did they want? A plus b, that's 1 plus negative 4 is negative 3. And that, is our answer. So, is this hard? Yeah, for sure. And it's tedious and there's lots of things to do. But the way that we can get something like this right is twofold, right? We have a really good strategy that gets the ball rolling even when we don't see the full plan, plug points into equations. We also just have the time. And that means we've got to be really good about the other math stuff. So that way we can save time to just go through this stuff. Now, in this case, I did do it the long way. There is a shorter way. I'm going to show you in a second. But there will be cases where the shorter way doesn't work. And so that's why I wanted to show you why plug points into equations works. It lets us get new equations. It lets us do substitutions. It lets us do all sorts of things that we wouldn't be able to do if we were just thinking through all the steps at once. We don't need to have the full plan. I always say this. We don't need to have step 3 to do step 1. Step 1 can be really simple and it gets the ball rolling. And then hopefully we can start to make connections that allow us to see step 3 and whatever else. So let's go to Desmos. What are we going to do? This is a really cool thing. So I'm going to pull it out. And this is, again, if we didn't know the answer, here is a way to solve this using a very little known feature of Desmos that I find usually works for about one question on the test. And we're going to use a regression to do this. So it's going to involve some steps, so just pay attention. First, I'm going to hit the plus and I'm going to create a table, okay? Now that table is a table of points. So we're going to take the points they gave us and we're going to put them in. So 3 is one of the x coordinates and 12 is the y that goes with it. And then we had negative 4 and we had 5. So I'm just plugging in the points, x's and y's, just like we think of them. Now in a new line, I'm going to create a regression. And so I'm going to do this by basically creating the equation that they originally had. So y equals, I'm gonna write it just like they gave it to me, and I'm gonna change it because it'll be wrong, but that's okay. X plus a squared plus b. So here is the issue. Right now, they know that a and b can be any number, and they're going to offer me the slider to try to figure it out. And I could do the slider, and I can then play with the a and b, and maybe through just, trial and error, I would have come across a being 1 and b being -3, and I would have seen that these two things go through those 2 points that I graphed, right? You can see the points right up here, right? So we could do that and guess and check our way there, but that's risky, because what if a and b weren't nice numbers, right? What if they were like 2/3 or something like that? Then we wouldn't be able to do that. So instead, we're gonna change this a little bit. First, we need to tell our calculator to do a regression, which means we gotta get rid of this equal sign. And instead of an equals, we're gonna use the squiggle. That's, for many of you, in the top left of your keyboard, a little tilde sign. But they have that here. If we go to the ABC button, it's right here, kind of on the bottom right, next to or close to the comma, next to the enter sign, so right here. And now it's going to start doing a regression. But it doesn't know how to do a regression because we haven't told it where to go for the points. Basically, what this calculator wants to do is it wants to do a bunch of math on the back end to find the best way to create a parabola that has this equation style that goes through those 2 points. So all we have to do is tell it where to find the points. We have to use, instead of x and y, we have to use x1 and y1. So that's where, notice the table has x1 and y1 as the headers. So all I have to do is go after the y and just hit 1. And now look, it automatically makes it a little subscript for us. Then we can go after the x and make it 1. And look, it graphed a parabola. It goes perfectly through those lines. And if I kind of scroll here, look what it did. You can see it, parameters. A equals 1, B equals -4. It instantly calculated those values for us. And if I really wanted to be lazy here, I could also just do A plus B, and it will even tell me the final answer of -3. The regression is really powerful because there are lots of SAT questions where we are given points and we are asked how to find the equation that goes to those points. It is time consuming to use this regression feature, but it can help you in a case like this where I think the algebra would have been even more time consuming. But it's worth noting that if some of the points we have to plug in involve zeros, we probably don't need a regression because 0 and 1 are really easy numbers that have properties that we can kind of see ourselves very easily. But these were not easy points. So here we would have needed to do some complicated algebra to figure out the A and B. So as much as I think it's good to memorize this, and maybe this gets you one hard question more right on your SAT next week, I don't want you to overdo it. Not every question that involves points and equations is going to involve this regression idea. Some of it is very simple, so I don't really use this very often, but this would be a case where I think it does help. If you have questions about this, the reading question I did, any of the stuff I talked about earlier in this video, or anything about the SAT that you want to know before your August SAT, please put in the comments. But also, if this helped you or if you're taking the SAT again later on, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, go to my channel homepage for literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours of free SAT prep. You can also become a channel member for $4.99 a month, and you have access to questions that I have written. So if you run out of official resources, these are really great ways to continue to practice with questions that are really hard and hitting those important topics, and you can cancel anytime. So if you do join the membership, you can cancel as soon as your August SAT is over. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope it's been helpful. Once again, I'm Mike Settele, founder of Settele Tutoring. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, Settele for more. Good luck on your August SAT.